I think everything starts at home. Equality starts at home. Justice starts at home. Peace starts at home. And this is why working on equitable family relations and equitable family laws is one of the most critical yet complex challenges that women, not only in this part of the world or within Muslim community, but I think around the world, are struggling with, because family law is extremely personal, yet it is extremely political.
Again, on the national level, I would say that advocacy plays a very critical role. Specific advocacy programs work with policymakers, legislators, and government officials to push for legal reforms, but also to promote gender equality and protect the rights of people.
It is said that the revolution starts at home. How can we combat structural violence in society without combating the violence happening at home? In this episode, we investigate how violence against women in Muslim contexts has been disguised behind outdated understandings of fiqh rulings. We instead look at Sharia as a foundation for equality in society and look into family law as one pathway for reform. We ask our guests, what role do states, religious leaders, civil society, and community organizations have in ensuring that women have meaningful decision-making power and are able to enjoy dignity, security, and respect? I'm your host, Rehama Namkose, and you are listening to Musawah Podcast, a space dedicated to deconstructing family and personal status laws, understanding Muslim women's rights, and exploring what it takes to achieve dignity, equality, and justice for all. With our guests today, Sylvia Noagbesenu and Hala Al-Karib, we examine the transformative measures needed to reform family laws and their impacts on Muslim contexts. We also look into existing egalitarian family laws as examples that change is indeed possible.
Culture and traditions is where we should start by, first of all, look at the sources of inequalities within our culture, within our traditions, and negotiate it and look deeper and try to identify. We can't have unequitable relationships at home and assume that women in the public spaces will be treated on equal basis. So it needs to be changed. It cuts across our policies, it cuts across our laws, and it cuts across our attitudes and behaviors and our convictions and how we interact with our culture and our history.
Hala is an activist and research practitioner from Sudan. She is the regional director of the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa, SIHA.
So depending on where you come from, the inheritance process requires that you inherit either from your mother line or from your father line. And in this case, we would refer to it as paternal or maternal inheritance process based on custom.
Sylvia expands on how cultural practices overshadow existing rights, giving an example from inheritance laws.
Although the law actually has overridden the customary practices, these practices still do exist. The cultural context would actually stand, and women in most cases are denied from inheriting such properties. So these can be some difficulties and limitations that impact on the rights of women, especially when it comes to property rights or economic rights or inheritance.
Sylvia is a human rights lawyer, a social policy specialist, and a gender equality advocate from Ghana. She's the co-founder and executive director of Initiative for Gender Equality and Development in Africa. Sylvia points out how cultural practices often leave women more vulnerable to violence and discrimination. For example, in Zambia, when a husband passes away, some women find themselves forced to automatically marry his brother. This customary practice denies the widow her bodily autonomy and consent, in addition to denying her property inheritance from her late husband. The Chilala case has brought this practice to center stage and captured national attention, including many grassroots and women's rights organizations.
She was literally being forced into it. At some point, she was being helped by some other community women who were trying to get her to understand that she had a right and she could say no. But it was really difficult for her in that situation at the time. The family of the deceased person stated that if she was not interested, then she should actually then leave the family. I mean, go back to her family house or go back to her family, but not go with the children. So this meant that the children were going to be taken away from her.
As Mrs. Chilala was negotiating for her children and the home that she had built with her husband, she suffered great discrimination from her husband's family. Her brother-in-law, who she was initially supposed to marry, began burying deceased bodies in her front yard as a means of punishment for rejecting the marriage proposal. And to force her out of the property he was set to inherit from his deceased brother. This act was an attempt to seize her land, a situation that reflects a troubling pattern in Zambia where customary laws often allow male relatives to dispossess women of their property. Property grabbing is a form of economic violence that not only leaves women financially vulnerable, but also increases their risk of other forms of violence. Although not a customary or a Muslim practice, land grabbing impacts many women across countries and faiths on the continent.
So when the women's rights organizations got wind of this, we got into the discussion and we got in the picture. This brought about a lot of advocacy in the Zambia. And it wasn't only limited to that family. We had a big conference on discriminatory laws and how this must be scrapped. And we had a lot of conversations about legal changes and reforms with relevant policy makers, but also institutions that were relevant at the time to discuss this critical issue. Eventually, policymakers, even traditional authorities realized that this was definitely not right. It was against the right of the woman. And it was actually brought to the local courts.
Mrs. Chilala's landmark case in Zambia called attention to customary laws and how inheritance issues often emanate from customary practices. Such practices are in fact unconstitutional. The Chilala case also served as a legal precedent for legal reform regarding the rights of marriage, right to property, inheritance, and even the rights to maintenance of and custody of children. This case empowered women, especially in rural areas where customary law is prevalent, providing a legal basis to challenge discriminatory practices inconsistent with constitutional rights.
Family law, as personal as it is, it's extremely political and public, because it manifests in the public spaces. Entering into the marriage itself is a struggle. Ensuring that entering into this institution, it happened on equitable basis and consent and understanding of what it takes. The imbalance starts from the beginning. There is no discussion about the safety and security and the economic security of the women during or post marriage, and it's not part of the policy or law or legal framework. So women, they enter into the marriage and they are quite exposed. And usually when it comes to marriage, it's mostly about, tradition. And this is how societies in our part of the world approach overall all the personal status. Laws and policies, they defer it immediately to traditions, to culture, to religion to deal with it. Those spaces completely controlled by extremely patriarchal institutions that's informed by the fact that subordination of women is part of traditions and culture and so on. So that's a challenge in itself. But it's all part of the social and economic construct of society that shaped these realities of women and girls and just said, this is how things should be. And this is how you should live your lives. And they go on through life without having rights. If they are entitled to, some form of inheritance or land or resources, they are at the bottom of the list because of who they are, because of their identity. And if they were lucky, they can get something very small. And at the same time, they are expected to serve their parents or grandparents who left most of the inheritance to their male counterparts. Either it goes to their male siblings and so on. Even their own partners or husbands, they don't inherit them.
Understanding this direct link between discriminatory family laws and harmful cultural practices and violence against women is a necessary starting point. Taking the Chilala case as an example, we can recognize the link of both laws and cultural practices that enable violence against women. The recognition of these links allow for raising awareness, advocacy, and mobilization to implement necessary legal change.
It's really very important for women to get organized. That's a step one. And the model of organization, it shouldn't be limited to NGOs or neoliberals' agenda. We should organize the way that it works for us. I've worked with women who are organized around coffee. They have something called the coffee groups. Coffee is like in Ethiopia and part of Sudan. It has its own ritual and it's very important. And so women, they come around coffee and within a specific neighborhood. And they play a very significant role. They act as neighborhood watch. They do protections against sexual harassment and sexual violence. They do community policing work. They monitor any acts of violation that happens to girls in the neighborhood. They keep money for each other and empower each other financially through those savings. We have to not to forget that we are accountable to our people and to the women. And this is the value of the network in this part of the world.
Advocacy plays a role in raising awareness generally about the existence of laws and how they should be implemented or enforced. It also plays a great or critical role in bringing about changes in society. So some of the programs that work to identify, let's say in this case, discriminatory laws, and also for purposes of reforms, advocacy plays a role to ensure, in my case, for example, gender equality, but also protection of women's rights in this regard.
You need legislators, policymakers, civil society organizations, women's groups, unions, and the people to organize for equality, fairness, and dignity.
You need policymakers around the table to be able to see and ensure that the policies are impacting positively or negatively, and then what there is to be done or what can be done in that context. Beyond that, you need legislators as well. We would usually bring it back to the doorstep of legislators to say that, well, this is what is happening. This is the impact of the law. It's positive. It's negative. We need to do something about it, especially when it's negative. But at the same time, we cannot also talk about actors when we are not talking about civil society organizations. When it comes to advocacy, civil society organizations are also very much considered as very important actors in this process because they are able to pick up issues that are happening on the ground and also identify the challenges and bring this back, serve as a bridge between grassroots and also policymakers. It also would include women's groups. It will include groups that focus on protection of the rights of children, children or even men in this regard. I would also emphasize traditional authorities, because this is also another relevant structure. In sub-Saharan Africa, the role of traditional authorities is critical to all of these processes, especially because of our governance structure. In most cases, at the community level and also at the different regional levels or divisional levels, traditional authorities play a critical role. They play a big role in reforming changes in their communities also, or establishing different practices also within their communities.
It's really important for us, where we have the privilege to serve and to empower, is also to allow to structure our institutions in a way we collaborate with the global movements.
This is where the Maputo Protocol comes in. The protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa was officially adopted by heads of state of the African continent and government on July 11, 2003 in Maputo, Mozambique, but was enforced in 2005. And according to UNDP Africa, it is one of the world's most comprehensive women's human rights instruments. It was formulated by the African Charter on Human Rights to focus on the rights and protection of women and girls in Africa. The key here is that the protocol serves to recognize the crucial role of women in the preservation of African values based on the principles of equality, peace, freedom, dignity, justice, solidarity, and democracy.
It actually is an extensive protocol that, provides a lot of provisions in that document in terms of broad protection of the rights of women. So you'd have protection for the health of women on the continent, promotion of the rights of women and girls when it comes to education, promoting on the rights to peace and security, but also the promotion on the rights of marriage and also family laws. It cuts across the rights to the rights of the elderly, the rights of children in this regard, especially girls, but also the rights to property and the right to inheritance are all seen and protected under the Maputo Protocol.
For Muslim contexts, the Maputo Protocol can be a critical tool to change through legislation or to modify or abolish laws, regulations, and customary practices that discriminate or enable violence against women.
First of all, we have to understand that family law is a political issue, and the struggle for equitable, family laws and realities, it's a political struggle. So we shouldn't separate it from politics. And it should be at the heart of our political conversations and make sure that it's part of the agenda when we speak about change and transformation at the national level, at the political level. That's very, very important.
The Maputo Protocol also ensures that member states or state parties have a responsibility to implement these rights and that they can be held accountable. Most organizations and institutions are using the Maputo Protocol for their advocacy work.
When the protocol came into force, there's been a lot of effort at getting different African countries to ratify the protocol. And the ratification process requires that once you sign up to that protocol as a country, you agree to the contents of the protocol, then you have a responsibility as a nation to actually translate the content of that protocol into the national laws of the national the country in this case, or the nation. And for that matter, there's a lot of efforts that have gone into the ratification, advocating for governments and countries to ratify the protocol. At the moment, we have about 43 countries that have ratified the protocol, which is very impressive, because when you're looking at a continent of about 55 countries, then you'd have 43 countries having ratified. This is very impressive, and it actually provides a basis for a lot of work to be done on the protocol, but it also doesn't mean that the work on ratification is over.
But beyond the ratification comes implementation. And without a mechanism for enforcement or compliance, then there isn't really much progress. This is critical as it allows for the Maputo Protocol to not just be a tool for monitoring, but also a progressive tool for reforming, changing or even abolishing laws enabling violence against women, such as customary laws that permit polygamy, property grabbing, early and forced marriages, and inadequate legal protections against marital rape, or even lenient sentencing for gender-based violence.
So the truth of the matter is that unless we approach the issues and the challenges of inequality as nations, it's very, very difficult for us to speak about peace and stability in our society. So this is how family law is critical, because unless these issues of inequality has been addressed, most of our societies will struggle with instability and will struggle with societal violence. So in Uganda, when it comes to succession laws, when it comes to access to property, when it comes to access to land, despite the struggle of the feminist organizations and women's rights organizations, equality doesn't exist. And more, there is a lot of struggle. Many women who were thrown to jail and criminally profiled for demanding. A country like Somalia, there is certain communities who are they go beyond traditional interpretations of inheritance, where they deny women complete access to any form of inheritance. So it's it's very complex and very difficult realities that we are working within. But also what's encouraging is the level of awareness, and I think about within majority of the women organization, that despite the importance of women political participation and access to decision making.
While the Maputo Protocol places a lot of emphasis on marriage rights, especially on how property is distributed within and outside a marriage, Sylvia and many others doing advocacy work on the protocol realized the limitation. Article 7D in the Maputo Protocol states that in cases of separation, divorce, or annulment of a marriage, women and men must have the right to unequitable sharing of joint property derived from the marriage. But Sylvia and others found that the protocol does not define equitable sharing. They found that across their work in different African countries, when it comes down to property distribution upon divorce, there were no specific laws guiding the judiciary on how to do it. The judiciary was dependent on case laws to be able to distribute property. And in most cases, the courts would request for the two parties to show monetary evidence of contributing to their particular property.
And again, the question that was being asked is that should these be based on references on monetary contribution? How about the non-monetary contribution that was brought into the marriage? In the sense that, the situation where in most cases, sometimes some women were not working or did not have economic or were not economically empowered. We had to appear before the commissioners, all 11 commissioners on different occasions, ranging from 2013 up until it took us 7 years for us to be able to get to the point that the commission accepting that general equitable sharing must be defined in a way that is justiciable to both men and women. We see that, a world where equality and also equity in this instance or in this case is actually protected, enhanced, and also upheld to a large extent. But we also see there is actually a journey to this world.
While a lot of work still needs to be done, this kind of change was only possible because people gathered and addressed issues at hand. We wouldn't be where we are today without the work of past activists, groups, thinkers, and change makers.
Organization is important for women because we are deprived of this. Patriarchy works very hard to isolate us from each other, very hard, or limits us into specific corners. And when we organize, we are exposed. We are exposed to our diversity, and we are exposed, to our experiences as well. And, and that's very, very important. This is why we are working. This is why we're doing what we're doing. If we can't see it, we cannot work for it.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Rehema Namkose, Senior Regional Program Officer, Sub-Saharan Africa at Musawah. You can learn more about our work in the show notes.